Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for an MP webinar covering the 2022 Recruiting Best Practices to Land Top Talent Now. I'm Katie Kreider, Marketing Specialist here at MP. For those of you joining us on a webinar for the first time, MP is a full-service human capital management company. We offer a complete suite of products and services to support organizations through the entire employee lifecycle, including recruiting, HR, payroll, benefits administration, time and attendance, and compliance assistance. We support our clients with cutting-edge technical solutions, as well as proactive, reliable service and a deep HR and payroll expertise. At MP, we are wired for HR and help our clients succeed by aligning their people strategy with their business goals. Just as a quick legal disclaimer, this training is intended for educational and informational purposes. While we hope that you will learn a lot today, we are not attorneys and the information should not be construed as legal advice. I'm excited to introduce your presenter for today's program, Tracy Westcott. Tracy is the Talent Solutions Manager for RPO, Recruitment, Processing, Outsourcing Services at MP. She has been in the talent acquisition field for nearly 2 decades and acted as Talent Acquisition Lead at Public Partnerships for 9 years. She holds a bachelor's degree from St. Michael's College in Vermont, and she has received her PHR, Professional Human Resources license from HRCI. Just a few housekeeping issues before we get started here today. If you would like to submit a question during the program, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar later today, along with the slides. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic off to Tracy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie. I'm really excited to be here today again. So during today's presentation, we're going to talk about some recruiting trends in 2022, kind of how things have changed, how things haven't changed in the last year or 2 years. We'll talk a bit about the Great Resignation. We'll talk about adaptive actions an employer can take, some best practices to ensure remote recruiting success, and creating a positive candidate and employer experience throughout the life cycle of the hiring process. And then we'll also touch on some different ways to optimize your tech stack in a remote environment as it relates to both recruiting and human resources in general. So as we look at 2022, as it relates to hiring, what is going to hold true throughout 2022 that we've also experienced in 21? So it is still a candidate market, no surprises there. There are challenges in reaching out to candidates to be able to meet the demand for the business needs. Turnover will continue to break records, and hiring decisions will need to continue to happen very quickly. Benefits are still front and center, and we'll really go into details around what benefits mean to candidates now too, because that has also changed. And also talk about flexibility in the workplace and how it can actually really be messy, or it can also be beneficial for employers. So why haven't we seen the Great Resignation slow down yet? You know, after a year, 2 years, why people are leaving the workforce. I looked at a lot of different studies, and it holds true that, most people are leaving due to toxic work environments, restored work-life balance. People are putting their, well-being front and center, burnout, exhaustion, and grieving. And then also an organization's response to COVID. And then just a basic lack of connection to the organization and team. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I think that some of that, relates to, the remote workforce in the sense that, I had mentioned that it can get a little bit messy, but I think that there are ways to stay connected to an organization, as we are continuing to, build out remote workforces. And I think the big thing here that, employers should take note of is that by not truly understanding what the employees are running from or what they're gravitating for, leaders can be putting the organization at risk. So for example, the most common, theme or example that we come across as recruiters, or just HR in general, is that, a pay increase can be a quick fix, but it's not necessarily a solution because that's not why the employee was leaving to begin with. And, we've seen some data around turnover within, 6 months and just a few months, just because a candidate may have left for, for more pay, but that really wasn't what they were looking for in terms of why they were leaving their organization. So I think as a recruiter, as an HR professional, there are ways that, we can dig in and really learn what does this candidate need to be successful, instead of, just a pay increase, for example. I think that there are a lot of media discussions right now that are around employee dissatisfaction with wages, but a lot of the studies that we're seeing, that's not necessarily the case. I know, there can be some argument there that people are leaving due to wages, but overall, the reasons that people are leaving are really for, this list we have here. So a lot of today that we'll talk about is, how we can be adaptable to these changes. So again, employees are, putting their own well-being first right now. And we as HR professionals or recruiters or really just leaders of any organization need to address the well-being of their staff. So how can we adapt to be able to do that? And, the pandemic has continued to remind us that we can't stop change. We need to continue to adapt to be able to experience and embrace that change as an organization. So in order to, adapt to the ever-changing markets, we need strong leaders and managers and supervisors and HR leaders that, are building adaptive teams, that have those types of skills. So some of those skills are listed here that, skills that can adapt to change positively and proactively. So consistent communication, teamwork, interpersonal skills, strategic thinking, active listening. I think that's really a big one right there, is active listening as a supervisor or a leader. And really just having a collaborative culture in place within the organization and within, each of the different teams, because I think that flexibility and efficiency can work side by side, because there's kind of been this notion in the past, I think this is more pre-pandemic, but that, working from home gives you more balance in your life, or work-life balance. But, it really doesn't seem to be the case right now, just based on the data and based on why people are leaving, due to the company culture and the environment, even in a remote workforce. So I think, building a culture, isn't just beer on tap in the office, or some other, in-office perks that or features that, were attractive for, primarily millennials, but also just, just the workforce in general right now. So there's some things from a remote perspective that we can really, focus on. So some of those things that we can, focus on in terms of some, more short-term or I guess easy, so to speak, things that, we as organizations can put into action, or some of these things here where, we're looking at the workforce, we're looking at remote environments. What does that look like? What are company sponsored social events that can bring people together, and not just a happy hour, where I think for some, that there is benefits to that, but there are other things to really embrace, to embrace that, those types of social events, recognition. And then, do you have a culture team? Or I know internally we have what's called the connected committee, things like that. So How do you boost retention? I think that, layoffs and restructuring, of the list of things of, why people are leaving is just really hard to reverse. You can't reverse layoffs. You can't reverse the restructuring. I think if you're, as an organization, people left due to a poor response to the pandemic, that can't be fixed. The toxic culture, takes some time to change. But I think, this list here gives you some, short term, easy, things that you can do as an organization to start to address some of these things and really, work on your employees' well-being. So as you look at, reimagining the workforce, not all employees want to climb the ladder. So a change of pace or an opportunity to, try something new or, make a lateral move, could be a great advantage to, working at your organization and, be able to retain that person that has that, company knowledge and, wanting to just, again, it's seeing what's important to them and figuring out a way that, that you can kind of reimagine their position. And then adjusting remote or office environments. Some people might need a predictable schedule with boundaries for family life balance. Because it, strictly remote right now, I don't think that is enough right now to be, attractive for a candidate. I understand, some positions you don't necessarily, have that opportunity, but can you reduce somebody's hours? Is that a possibility where, maybe it's short term or long term, what's important to them for their well-being so that they can be both effective in the office and in their personal lives. And then as far as company sponsored events, here when it comes to adapting, really, again, listening to the employees, that's part of having a culture committee or connected committee, but, provide opportunities for team building based on diverse populations. So it's not just happy hours, or different, virtual events, but maybe it's community service highlights, right? I know internally here at MP on our, weekly calls once a month, we highlight a employee that, has volunteered their time at a, organization that means a lot to them. And we get to celebrate that. And, it really brings pride in, in employees' work when they're able to share, those types of important, things to them, that they're able to share that with their organization. So something that I didn't add to this list, but I think organizations can also consider doing is internal surveys. It's not necessarily a quick fix because something like that can take a little bit of time, but any, internal survey that you can do to address those either areas of concern, but also just understanding your workforce and being able to plan accordingly. So don't wait until they leave to fix the problem or to, make it right for the next employee. Take a look at your current staff and see what you can do to help them to continue to retain them. And it's better for, both the employee and the employer to be successful. So I talk about this quite a bit with our team internally and just on some previous webinars, but I think it's a important one to, continue the conversation, as we continue to adapt to the changing market. So now that we've, covered the landscape of the Great Resignation and how it's continuing, I want to shift gears a little bit though and talk about, recruiting specifically. So, the talent acquisition and HR teams have continuing, to adapt and meet the needs of those employees. So as part of that, we've had to make that, we've had that obligation to shift from a traditional mentality of hire and retain to attract and provide. So from a, hiring or attracting perspective, that's where recruiting falls in. And then from provide, what is HR providing for their people teams? Again, it's going into that people first culture, because that's what people need and that's what people are asking for as they're, leaving organizations. And I think the shift to just from, a people culture perspective, or, as we look at HR people teams, is that, the shift has really been focused on compliance and decreasing liability for an organization, but it's not the case anymore. So, people teams are really trying to maximize the value of the people and their employees that work there by providing them with those resources to be successful. So ultimately, that drives the revenue up. So it helps the bottom line. And you're just becoming an employer of choice. So if you look at any top employers with tenured employees, and I've looked at some data around this, they are more successful. And the studies have shown that they are more successful because they are given the tools and the support and the opportunities that they need to be successful. And as it relates to recruiting, I think the power, it's really no surprise, but the power continues to shift from, company to the candidate. So what are we doing for the candidates right now that, we can continue to attract and provide opportunity for them? So from here, we'll talk a little bit about how companies can focus on their recruitment with people first approach, and also take a look at the different, their current processes that you can do to attract the best candidates, in this highly competitive market right now. So as we look at recruiting success, I asked the 3 questions. Do you have a plan in place to attract the right candidates that will stay and, that you will be able to provide for them in terms of what they're looking for? Again, what are you offering to provide those candidates? And then how are you communicating with the candidates to stay engaged? So do you have a plan in place? So remote and hybrid and office-based, opportunities have obviously changed, but I think this is the part where it can get a little bit messy. So there really can't be any blurred lines. And I think that organizations should really create defined policies and guidelines around those expectations. So, the work from anywhere mentality isn't always the case if it's remote. And not to mention from a compliance standpoint, it is important where that person is working. So I think that, there have been some examples that I've heard of organizations recently that, they are in a lot of states, and only certain states are being required to return to offices. And I think that just, it really makes it a little bit messy because, as employees that are in the same positions in different locations aren't required to go into the office, it really, it really just creates this kind of poor culture that, make people, want to run from, unless there's really a business reason why, that office needs to, be back in the office. So that's just a recent example that I have seen that has really caused some uproar, so to speak. And then also look at your, employee branding. So what does your web presence look like? So from a recruiting perspective, are you looking at your Glassdoor or website or Indeed or LinkedIn to look at, what those look like? Is the branding matching across the board? I meet with a lot of probably, mostly the smaller to mid-sized organizations that, they might not have a, dedicated, recruiting team, or they might not have a dedicated, a large HR team. So it really just hasn't been something that they've thought about, but it is really, really important, even as a small organization, to be mindful of, what those different sites look like. And, really make sure that you take ownership, because it can get a little bit messy from the candidate side, as they're trying to do your research. So share whatever you can on those. If you have, culture videos or, anything that you can, put on those web pages to just really increase that branding. And if you don't, have a recruiter, you may be able to assign, somebody within the organization to do that, to be able to showcase your organization. And then the other thing as it relates to, especially for Glassdoor, have you looked at those reviews? And, if you do have, bad reviews, I think it's very, very important to respond to those poor reviews without a, defensive response, but really thanking that person for their review and just really letting the candidates know that their voices are heard, because I think that says a lot about an organization. And then also, how are your employees supporting each other online? I think primarily on LinkedIn. Are you congratulating promotions? Are you, sharing things about your organization that makes it exciting to work there? Anything that you can do like that is really, free marketing really for your organization to attract people to work there. And then also, as we look at the continued, diminishing quality of direct applicants into your applicant tracking system, or just in general, because that post and coast mentality is a thing of the past. And I think that there are things that employers can do, even though it is a very competitive market, that they can really increase their candidate pool, whether that's through virtual job fairs, again, marketing your culture, what does that employee referral program look like, which we can get into a little bit more later. And then also, looking at your job descriptions. I think this is actually a very, very common, I don't want to say problem, but a common issue that I've seen where, I look at job descriptions and it's 2 pages long. And then when, it's time for the application, it's, a 15, 20-minute application. You're going to lose candidates by doing that. And if you can, just really cut down that job description when it comes to marketing and you're posting for the position, and really focus on, what the candidate is expected to accomplish, as opposed to, requirements, and focusing on requirements, because you really want to just be attracting candidates towards your organization, because then you're also really building out your talent pool as well, because they might not be a fit for that company, but what other kind of, non-traditional experiences or skills could they bring to either that position or your organization as you're, continuing to hire. And then in talking about what you're, offering to provide for the candidate, and this is where benefits are really, really important. And I think it goes beyond like your traditional benefits that, people think about, but they want to know what's in it for me. How does this compare to the other 3 offers that I have? What has been the hiring process up until this point? Are these people that I would want to work with? And, so these are the kind of things that people are thinking about right now as they're comparing opportunities. And again, if pay is not, the end all be all for someone and why they're looking, what is it that they're looking for that, maybe they would take your position that's, paying a little bit less. So, some different things that, organizations can think about is when it comes to thinking about the well-being and wellness, is different stipends for a gym or wellness. One thing that I love that I have seen a bit more lately is a covered pediatric sleep consultation. So, the organizations will pay, I think typically it's like they'll pay for it once a year. And you can have a pediatric sleep consultant, to help with your children sleeping, or they do adult sleep consulting too. So that has been a great additional benefit that does not cost the organization a lot, but it really focuses and shows that organizations care about the well-being of their staff and their families. And that's some of the things that people are really looking for. Other things that expensing a meal before a company meeting, like maybe you do a lunch and learn, and you can give everybody a gift card for a meal delivery or something like that. It shows a little something extra that you can do without costing the organization a lot of money. And then any professional development, I think that could go for both. That could also be talked about as we look at different lateral opportunities for candidates too, that they want to feel a little bit, they want something new, but they don't necessarily need or want more responsibility. So again, this really, really helps helps people feel more connected to their organization. And again, as far as benefits, we could talk about lack of childcare. So is there an opportunity for an organization to provide a certain amount of daycare? I've seen some companies that will have up to 20 days of backup daycare for parents to be able to utilize. Things like that are benefits that people are looking for. And then also return to work programs for parents. Sometimes they have a slow return to work where an employee can just come in 3 days a week for a certain amount of time and really slowly ease their way back into the organization. These conversations with candidates are happening a lot sooner, and it's not a red flag anymore if somebody is asking for flexibility. The one thing that I think can get a little bit messy is making sure that from a flexibility standpoint that there is some consistency around that though, and just being aware of what that looks like for your company or your organization, and just making sure that there's clear policies around that. And then how are you communicating to stay engaged with the candidates throughout the process? So this is really pretty straightforward, but having clear and concise processes is very important. What is the next step after you do the phone interview? And when is the timeline for that typically? There's really a need for speed right now. And I recommend every organization in our team that we should be replying to an application for a job within 24 hours. And keeping that constant engagement with the candidates to really set yourself apart. Sometimes I understand this can be hard as recruiters or HR professionals are being pulled in different directions, but it is really, really important to keep those candidates engaged throughout the process. And by keeping them engaged, if their interview isn't for another week, having those steps between the steps is going to be crucial to really keep them excited about the position. I've also talked to some hospitality leaders that are in recruiting and had some pretty interesting conversations around this, and in the mindset of bringing hospitality to hiring. And we can't bring candidates into the office in most cases right now to get, to really see the look and feel of the culture of the organization, but can you share a culture video so that they can get an idea of what even your remote culture is like? The other thing that I think is a great resource and not something that can necessarily be implemented quickly, but having a net promoter score process for candidates, even for candidates that maybe weren't brought through the process or weren't hired. I think it shows that the candidate's feedback is valued and that they're heard, and it gives companies the opportunity to continue to adapt their interview process so that they can continue to know what candidates are asking for and what candidates need throughout that process. So, and also as it relates to hospitality, I think that taking care of your team, the hiring managers, just as you would also take care of your guests or prospective candidates. So I think by taking care of your team, you're creating a structured hiring process for the interviewers. So there's no kind of blurred lines. The interviewer knows what they're looking for. It really, really helps speed things up when it comes to the hiring process. And then also the one thing I didn't touch on, but the power of a professional rejection, I think is really, really valuable. And, candidates that are not selected for the job, they, are still looking for that response. And I think that it really sets you apart that, when you follow up and are able to, provide a professional rejection of, why they didn't get the job and, offer to stay in touch and, be considered for other opportunities, it really goes a long way. This is especially important kind of depending on where somebody is in the interview process. For example, if you have only done a phone interview and decided that they were not a fit, I think in that situation, an email through your applicant tracking system can be sufficient, but it can be sufficient if you set those expectations with the candidate on the front end. But if somebody has gone through multiple interviews, maybe in-person interviews, it is really important to make that phone call and really talk to the candidate in terms of why they didn't get the job. And then as far as creating a positive candidate for both the candidate and the employer, the hiring managers throughout the process, I think there's really a balancing act between technology and having a personal connection with the candidate. So we'll get into this a little bit more into creating, as we look at creating a recruiting tech stack later in the conversation, but understanding where technology can replace a phone call, but then when a phone call can replace technology, similar to what I just mentioned, with the interview example, where and when are those emails appropriate and where should a phone call be done? And then again, just being clear at the front end with the candidate that the communication has been, that it's been relayed. So then as we look at creating a positive candidate and employer experience throughout that hiring process, and we think of the attract and provide model, how are you differentiating yourself throughout that interview process? What are you doing to get them excited? They are still likely getting responses from applications that they had applied for when they were applying for your job. So what are you doing to engage them so that they're not answering those messages? So the other thing that I think can be very beneficial, especially because even if somebody is currently working, they might need 2-3 months, 2-3 weeks, maybe a month before they can start. If there's a long period before they start, schedule a Zoom meeting with the hiring manager, with the supervisor. I know when I started here, there was a few weeks in between, and my supervisor set up a Zoom meeting to touch base with me. It was really a quick 30-minute touch base. Again, kind of gave me a lay of the land a little bit more. I had an opportunity to ask some more questions, really informal, but it really, really goes a long way and shows the excitement of that new hire. And then as we think about providing for both the candidate and the employer experience through both hiring and onboarding, and I say onboarding because they are, like I said, still probably, hearing from previous applications. So, what are we doing now that they're even onboarded to provide? So what is the timeline for that candidate and hiring manager? So as it relates to hiring specifically, I think that, we need to look at setting a timeline for feedback. One of the biggest challenges as a recruiter is getting feedback from a hiring manager. And I think that there are ways that we as recruiters can speed that process up. Scheduling a 10-minute debrief with a hiring manager can be very, very effective. And just putting it on their calendar, maybe early in the morning, or end of the day, whatever makes the most sense for that hiring manager, that that you'll be able to get 10 minutes to talk about that candidate and get, a debrief so that you can then engage with the candidate again to continue to keep the process moving as quickly as possible. The other thing, and we touched on a little bit as it relates to providing for the employer or the hiring manager, is setting up, an interview kit and having structured interview questions and a schedule, for each of the position, and maintaining consistency for everybody that you are interviewing for that position. So it isn't meant to create more work, which it can sometimes be perceived as. You're just giving the hiring manager the tools so that they can work faster and more efficiently and get the details from the candidate that they need to ensure that they'll be successful in that role. It gives them a consistent measure of determining what they're actually looking for. And having that structure also can mitigate some biases that can often come up throughout the hiring process. And really the benefits of doing this too, not only just the short term, but the long term, is that if you have questions that aren't generating the intended outcome, you can shift gears and adapt those questions and, and change it so that you are getting what you need out of that short time within that interview process. So structured interviews really do allow you to make decisions faster. It really gives deadlines and structure to hiring managers, to recruiters. And it really, when the process is ad hoc and you're kind of shooting from the hip, I think you ultimately end up losing a lot of time. So really invest today in making that change to the process so that you can work more efficiently and have a better candidate experience. So adapting your tech stack in a remote environment. Some companies, depending on the size, have more luxury, so to speak, when it comes to their tech stacks, and some don't. So I think that there are a lot of ways that you can automate your process to make hiring more efficient on both the candidate and the employer side. So are you using video tools, and are you doing virtual hiring events? Building out templates in your ATS. If you don't have an ATS, building out templates in your Outlook, in your email, can really help and save time. Building templates within the booking tools. There's plenty of booking tools out there that are free. You don't even need to pay for a booking tool, but it saves a lot of time for both the candidate, for the recruiter, for the hiring managers, everybody. It just saves a lot of time so that people are able to work around their schedule. And then automating your employee referral program. I think that this also helps from a marketing perspective, as I talked about before. Some applicant tracking systems, you're able to automate that employee referral process, but as much as you can automate that, get the open positions that are important in front of employees every single week. It not only helps you from a marketing standpoint in terms of getting new employees in, but it also gives current employees the opportunity to see what positions are available within your company as we think about making some of those lateral moves to be able to provide for your current employees. So I know internally, our applicant tracking system, every Monday, there's an email that gets sent out. It shows the referral bonus and in the positions that we want our employees to promote. Right from that email, they can actually share on LinkedIn, on via email. There's a lot of different ways that they can on social media. There's a lot of different ways that they can share, and it will automatically track who referred that candidate. So it's a really, really great tool that employees can use. And then reference tools. I do think that this is a bit of a luxury. I don't see a ton of people using them, but there are some really great reference tools. What I am seeing a lot more of is different assessment tools for, personality assessments, cognitive, skills-based that you wouldn't necessarily be able to determine in an interview, and then predictive index as well. That has been a really, really great resource for both us internally and for our clients as well. So I think there's a lot here, but I think choosing your sourcing tools based on your industry and based on your needs is very important. I don't think that every organization needs a LinkedIn recruiter account. There are other options, but I think it is a great tool for some companies. So it's really understanding what your industry needs are, because again, also Indeed, I think it's a wonderful resource. It's a little bit noisy right now, as is pretty much any job board right now, but what tools will make you successful based on what your needs are. So not every company needs all of these tools. This is more from an HR perspective, but as you look at, your internal tech stack across the board, one of the biggest benefits that I think that an organization can have as it relates to hiring staff, onboarding, and then the consistent communication is really having your tech stack integrated. So having a true hire to retire system that you can use, that when somebody applies to your position, that within your applicant tracking system, they are easily gone into onboarding. Their application is already there. There's still a lot of paper applications that we come across that candidates have to then find a scanner or printer or try to fax it. And it really adds time. So any way that you can cut down that, is very beneficial both internally. And if you have a true hire to retire HCM platform, all of those will talk to each other. And there are opportunities too, where if you don't need every portion of that, you don't need to necessarily implement that, it's really depending on what you need. But if you have a system that has the ability to integrate everything as you continue to adapt and grow, it will be important to make sure, as you consider that it's a platform that would allow you to be able to do that as you continue to grow. So in terms of our team here at MP, I wanted to just talk just a little bit about recruiting process outsourcing services that we offer, and how it's a little bit different than a traditional staffing agency. So the way that it's different is that our team is really just an extension of your team. So we partner in your success. So whether you have a current internal recruiting function, or if your HR team is doing it currently, our recruiters will work alongside your team, but then sometimes we are your only recruiting platform. So in situations like that, you don't necessarily need to invest in those different resources that a typical full recruiting team would need. So really kind of think about and understand, what are there pieces that can be outsourced. It's not always the case, but it is something that I think that organizations can consider as a cost savings as you think about some of those positions that you're trying to fill. So who typically would consider an RPO services? So a company that doesn't have a full-time recruiter, companies without, again, without the sophisticated sourcing tools, if you don't have an applicant tracking system, things like that, those are great reasons to consider outsourcing that portion of your business. So I just want to thank everybody today for joining the call today. I really enjoyed talking about this, and I hope to come on again in the coming months to continue to talk about ways that we can adapt and change to the ever-changing market right now from a recruiting perspective. Please feel free to reach out to me directly too if you would like a 15-minute consultation or bounce any ideas off of me or my team. Happy to help. And I thank you again for joining, and hopefully we will see you next week for our next webinar on Thursday.
Thank you, Tracy. Lots of valuable information on a complex topic. Any questions that were not able to be answered on today's program will receive a response via email within 5 to 7 business days. The MP HR team is here to guide your organization on any HR compliance issues. If you would like to learn more about how we can assist your organization, please visit our website to set up a short 15-minute call. Be sure to join us next week on the same day and time for our webinar on 2022 interviewing, best practices, and compliance guidelines. Visit our website to register and to see the full calendar of upcoming events and available resources. We will be sending out a recording of today's webinar and the presentation slides this afternoon. Thanks for joining us, and have a terrific day.